because our little brains are so active and so busy trying to help us, instead of saying, and my situation is not okay, we don't have the wherewithal to do that. The developing brain doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. So instead we go, I am not okay in who I am, in my body, in my being. I'm wrong. I'm terribly, terribly wrong.
Science journalist Donna Jackson Nakazawa explains more about adverse childhood experiences, how they can have enduring impacts on our lives, and how to gain resilience and recovery. This is an audio excerpt from her video interview for the Anxiety Super Conference. See the notes for links and resources.
Welcome to this interview. I'm Megan Gibson, your conference co-host. Today, I'm speaking with Donna Jackson Nakazawa, an award-winning science journalist and speaker. Her newest book, The Adverse Childhood Experiences Guided Journal, offers targeted writing techniques to help readers recognize childhood trauma patterns and reset their brain's internal stories for newfound resilience. Donna's other books include Girls on the Brink, The Angel and the Assassin, Childhood Disrupted. Donna's also the creator and founder of a popular narrative writing to heal program called Your Healing Narrative. Here's the thing I really want you to know about Donna, though. She's always following her curiosity and her unanswered questions from her last research project to get deeper into the solutions for healing and thriving. And so that's why I keep asking her back. I can barely keep up with the awesomeness that is Donna Jackson Nakazawa's research and writing, and yet I make time for it because she is so good at this. Donna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Such a pleasure to be with you. You're my favorite interviewer, so let's roll.
Oh, thanks for starting off with a compliment for me. It's not about me. Okay, so your newest book teaches people actual tools to help readers really reprogram their brains out of trauma and anxiety. And we're going to share some of those today. But first, I want to start with the research that the book is based on, which is ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences Evaluation. So what is it? Where did it come from? And what did that original study leave out that has changed since the original research?
Yeah, so the name of the book is The Adverse Childhood Experiences Guided Journal, and we worked all that in, which usually we try to avoid doing in book titles, because the term itself, adverse childhood experiences, is a term that has been around, most people don't realize, since the 1990s. Research began on how adverse childhood experiences, and we'll get into what they mean, can really shape the nervous system, the brain, and physical and mental health across a lifetime. So we really wanted to do honor to this field of research in the title of the book. Adverse childhood experiences, which I think we can also call ACEs for short, just so that we'll shorten that up for people. They're experiences in childhood that meet a couple of criteria. They could fall into one of four categories. They could be household dysfunction. That's definitely the most pressing and usually has the biggest effect on the developing nervous system, the architecture of the brain, and how the immune system will function, and factor in mental health across lifespan. So those are things like growing up with a parent who had an untreated mental health disorder, or growing up with parents who bickered and fought all the time and or divorced or separated. It's not just divorce. It's what was that emotional climate in the home around your parents' relationship. Losing a parent. I lost a parent early in life. He died very suddenly, my father. And that kind of sudden traumatic loss, obviously. Growing up with parents who really regularly put you down or make fun of you or joke at your expense or humiliate you. These types of family dysfunction, and researchers had just never looked at whether or not they had a cost on human well-being until the mid-1990s. Another one, and I certainly, I've interviewed thousands of people across my career, neuroscientists, individuals who are suffering from anxiety or trauma, psychologists, psychiatrists. That's my career has been to bring together how adversity and trauma affects us emotionally and what that means for our health, and more importantly, pathways to resilience, right? Pathways to thriving and resilience. So another big category of ACEs is feeling that your family doesn't really have your back in one of a couple of ways. Emotionally, if you're in emotional distress, is there anybody you can turn to? Or physically, like you're sick and nobody takes you to a doctor, or you're just not that important. People who feel like they had to parent their parents, right? That their needs were just not relevant. That is a category of adverse childhood experiences. What they all have in common under this umbrella, so I'm on the umbrella of household dysfunction, and I'm going through categories of household dysfunction. We also have things like watching there be abuse in the home, or being sexually or physically abused yourself, watching your mother be abused. So it encompasses a lot, but what they all have in common is that something was happening that shouldn't happen, and you had no adult to turn to. You had nobody to say to you, hey, I know this is happening. It's not okay. You are precious and loved unconditionally. And we are here to help you through it. So it's that combination of factors. Bad things are happening. They're kind of a secret, and or there isn't enough support for you to process in your mind, okay, this is my mom or dad. I'm in the living room and I can't tie my shoes and no one's helping me, but they're making fun of me. These feelings that we have that come about because of that household dysfunction do a couple of really significant things. They begin to give us the message that we're not okay, but because our little brains are so active and so busy trying to help us, instead of saying, and my situation is not okay, we don't have the wherewithal to do that. The developing brain doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. So instead we go, I am not okay in who I am, in my body, in my being. I'm wrong. I'm terribly, terribly wrong. And that begins to shift the action of our nervous system and our self-beliefs and how we see ourselves and how we respond to ourselves in adversity for the rest of our lives. Quickly, other categories of umbrellas of types of adversity are, of course, community oriented, right? Like if you grow up with poverty or discrimination or sexism or racism or substandard schools or inability to get good medical care, that is a very, very intense type of adverse childhood experience. Another category are environmental, growing up with school shootings, growing up with climate change, right? So there are all of these different types of adverse childhood experiences. And now we've added social stressors through social media, this idea that I don't fit in, I'm not good enough, I won't be loved, I can't be accepted 24/7. All these together begin to change the brain and change the nervous system, change the immune system. And we see those effects across 2,000 studies over the past 30 years, showing a greater likelihood of autoimmune disorders, mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, bipolar, cancer, irritable bowel syndrome, heart disease. There is almost not a illness or medical concern or mental health concern that is not tied to a history of adverse childhood experiences.
It's incredibly compelling and remarkable. Now, I think many more people are aware of them and understand what they are. Just the other day, I was visiting with my mother-in-law, and she said, I just learned about this thing called the adverse childhood experiences. And I was like, you're kidding, right? She was like, I didn't realize I had, and of course I had clocked that a while ago. I know you have.
Yeah, you know.
Right, I knew, but I wasn't going to tell her. But, just the impacts and the effects, and it's something that once people know, it can also be when you first learn about it, and I don't know if you remember, but there's kind of a developmental thing that happens. You learn about ACEs, and all of a sudden you can kind of be alarmed, like, oh my gosh, like you start doing the math, there's quizzes online and things like that. And it can be a little bit shocking, right? Where you're like, oh dear.
100%. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Guided Journal is that, knowledge is really great. Knowledge is wonderful, but we have very good evidence that knowledge in and of itself is not enough to help us change old patterns of responding. If we respond to stress in our current life as a parent or at work, or, when we are facing a chronic condition, if we respond to stress with that same sense of I'm wrong, there's something wrong with me, and we engage in that kind of ruminative self-judgment and self-derogation, which, if you have a history of adverse childhood experiences, those patterns of rumination literally get formed in the brain at an early age. So the more likely you are the more adverse childhood experiences you had, the more they affected you, the more likely you are to get caught up in mind drama and rumination later in life. Those patterns in the default mode network get set really fast. It's that kind of fight, flight, freeze. Something's not right here. It must be me. There's something wrong with me. And those voices of self-criticism that you messed up, you did it wrong, you're not good enough. Of course, you're sick again because, it's your fault. Those are really, really, really hard to shake. And knowing that adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, play a role in how you move through your lived experience right now, today, knowing that is a little overwhelming. It can hit
for sure. Yeah.
At first, it can hit kind of hard. I hear from thousands of people about this, like gobsmacked, they'll read one of my books and be like, whoa, I had no idea. And we have great evidence that the brain is so neuroplastic. It remains neuroplastic throughout life. And knowledge in and of itself is not enough to change these patterns that we're talking about. We may find that we're more reactive to stress than we want to be. We may find that we're harder on ourselves than we want to be. We may find that we engage in more judgment of ourselves and others than we want to be. We may recognize my head is not a lovely garden. And wow, the things that happened to me growing up, the things I was told about myself, the way I was treated, the messages that I received from the environment around me were not good. For whatever reason, right? We talked about all the different categories and what it could be. But knowing that, once we understand it and we also embrace the fact that this is changeable, just that knowledge is not enough, Megan. It's not enough. We have really good science to show us that we actually have to intervene and apply tools. The brain will overlay its old patterns on top of new approaches and ideas. If we don't get in and practice them, that is how we change neural structure. And so what I have found as an expert on adverse childhood experiences and author of many books on the topic and lecturing all over the world is that we don't have enough tools. People want more tools. If knowledge and acceptance are not enough, what are the tools? Well, a lot of them are really fantastic and obvious. I don't need to tell everybody. Meditation is awesome. Yoga is great. Talk therapy, mind-blowing. All these things are important. But when we have a history of adverse childhood experiences, the brain can get really, really sticky in these areas that I'm talking about, the default mode network, where it's just spitting up and generating. Literally, we can see it on brain scans. All these messages that you suck and other people suck. Sorry to use that language. And that things are really big, that when something happens, when your teenager comes in the room and, has a really distressing thing to tell you, that your distress is here. And you're like, how do I bring it down so that I have the lowest heart rate in the room, because this beautiful person in front of me deserves that from me. But all of those experiences of adversity and trauma in your own past can prevent you from being who you want to be toward yourself and others. We need more tools. So that is why I wrote this book, The Adverse Childhood Experiences Guided Journal. It's based on my 30 years of research into trauma, emotions, adversity, and healing and resilience. And I began to see that this was the single most underutilized, science-proven tool in the healing toolbox. And I had to do it.
This material in an excerpt from a longer podcast or video. Follow link in description to learn more.